Hi everyone, I'm Zach Reinhardt, here to review the new Asa-Chang and Junray album, Mahou. Asa-Chang and Junray are a kind of just experimental and general band that's been around since I think the late 90s. And in that time of the late 90s and throughout the 2000s, they put out some really remarkable and beautiful pieces of just strange experimental music. Their kind of formula for a track was to take traditional Indian tabla drumming and combine that with like cut up, manipulated spoken vocals, sometimes sung, but mostly spoken, and put that in front of a really just kind of beautiful, expansive backing track of guitars and trumpets and a string section and piano or something. And with that formula, they created songs like Hana and Sennaka and Kage no Nai Hito, of which there's a really incredible live performance that I will link in the description. But these songs were these huge, beautiful, expansive, like 7, 8, or 9 minute magnum opus pieces of music. Asa-Chang and Junray had this ability to write these incredible, just slow burners that started off incredibly sparse and just really slow, and they would build very slowly, and then they'd make it all worth it with just a beautiful rush of a climax that would come at the end of the song. And they like to write very kind of melancholy, somewhat sad melodies, and it was all very powerful. And this kind of 2000s era Asa-Chang and Junray put out some of my favorite records of all time. There's not a single band in the world that sounds like Asa-Chang and Junray. They are wholly unique. And of course, they had plenty of smaller, less ambitious tracks to kind of break up the space between these huge, ridiculously ambitious songs that were also great. But the parts that really stick in my memory are these just huge magnum opus pieces that were kind of the focal point of each record. But on this new album, they make a few changes to the Asa-Chang and Junray formula. Number one, they opt for kind of prettier, happier, kind of classical music informed melodies. Number two, the electronics that were always just kind of accents to tracks in the past have taken a bit more of a forward position on this album. There's a lot more synths and a lot more just electronics in general. And they replace what would be like a string section or something on an older Asa-Chang and Junray track. And number three, they drop the tabla drumming. U-zhaan, who was their tabla drummer, is no longer part of the band. And while they still keep the manipulated kind of cut up vocals, they no longer have the tabla drumming that was there kind of doubling the vocals. And these three changes, along with just generally weaker songwriting, have weakened significantly the Asa-Chang and Junray formula. The tracks Mahou and Kokuhaku, which are kind of intended to be the big, expansive, ambitious focal points of the record, are kind of soft and slow and a bit happier than their past work, but they don't really build into anything. There isn't really a big payoff or a climax to these kind of slow builds. They just kind of build for a little while and then they're over without ever really meeting a focal point or a real like climax. The manipulated cutting on the vocals is significantly less rhythmically intense or complex. It just feels like this person is speaking to me and they have some sort of speech impediment. And without the tabla drumming kind of doubling the vocals, um, the rhythmic parts aren't really driven home and it isn't really made clear that this is a like crafted rhythmic component to the song. And a few of the less ambitious tracks also feel kind of undercooked and underwritten. The song Gyokan ni Hana Hitotsu is a kind of just typical pop rock track. It's kind of melancholy and it's all right, but there's nothing really special about it. It feels kind of like filler. And the song Ani no Endless Dance Taiso is this kind of strange, I don't know, exercise track that feels just really out of place in the album and it like does not fit with the rest of the tracks at all. There's a Cornelius remix of Kokuhak, which has a bit more of a climax than the original track, but it still doesn't really do a whole lot for me. It just kind of replaces the piano of the original track with guitar. But hey, if you're into Cornelius, he makes an appearance on this album, but it's not all bad. They do a few covers of some of their older tracks, which go over really well and are some pretty interesting different takes on the original tracks. They cover Nigatsu and Mokin no Uta. And I like a couple of the newer tracks as well. The song Binro to Onnanoko is pretty good. It's kind of show tunesy in its melody and it's piano driven mainly, but the piano really kind of lets loose and does whatever the hell it wants. It seems kind of drunk, but it never really gets off the song. It's never a problem. It's kind of a controlled chaos. And I like the vocals a lot. There's kind of this like high note climax at the end of the song that I really like. And the melody kind of alternates between the vocal part and this like violin and trumpet part. And it's a pretty interesting track. It's accessible and it's a lot of fun. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but it's still very well written and very experimental as well. But overall, I'm kind of disappointed with this album. It's decent. There are a lot of songs that are just okay, but when you compare to how great a lot of their output in the 2000s was, this is probably one of their worst albums. I'm feeling a 6 out of 10, which breaks my heart because I love Asa-Chang and Junray. If you're not a longtime fan like me, maybe you'll enjoy this record a lot more. I don't know. It's certainly still interesting and it has still a lot of the same kind of features that made Asa-Chang and Junray interesting in the past, but they're just a little toned down and not quite as bold in this album. I really recommend you dig into the Asa-Chang and Junray back catalog. Their older albums are all really good, and like once again, there's not a single band in the world that sounds like Asa-Chang and Junray. So yeah, that's me. Asa-Chang and Junray, new album, Mahou. I'm a little disappointed, but it's all right.